Week 1 is officially in the history books, and with Week 2 just around the corner, I wanted to highlight some key storylines to look into during the next week. If you like this series idea, then I recommend you let me know, and I can do a lot more of them leading up into Week 3. Today I'm just going to do my favourite 3, and just give a little bit of reasoning to each point and why it is important to follow it. Of course, my opinion on whether teams will do certain things or won't do certain things, and factors that might include on that decision. Alright, enough for the talking, let's just get straight into the idea. My first storyline to follow is whether or not the Raiders will continue their offense. Jarvis McClam and Philip Hahn combined for a team record amount of yards for 2 receivers, and Christian Strong was on fire all day. Strong went for 386 yards, and McClam and Hahn went for 152 and 145 respectively. The rushing game was severely affected by the lack of Sandro Platzkammer. He has an unknown suspected ankle injury that has kept him out of this week and has also put him to day on questionable on the weekend. Bonetti came in at running back and did a serviceable job, but also did fumble the ball and is not what I would call a number 1 starting running back. The natural X factor and best player on their offense is of course Jarvis McClam. He had 435 all-purpose yards and had 3 touchdowns, 1 receiving, 1 passing and 1 kickoff return. Those kickoff returns, he was unstoppable. And I think if the offense is able to start on the 50 or even the opposition 40 every drive, they're going to be able to put up points regardless if they're without Sandro. Receivers like Marco Schneider are excellent, and their homegrown talent is arguably the best out of everyone when it comes to receiver core. Going into Week 2, the Raiders have the Heltovic guards, who struggled mightily with the Barcelona Dragons, who we'll get to later, and players like Theo Lundstrom are excellent examples of great receivers in the league, but I do not think the Barcelona Dragons have as talented of a receiver core as the Raiders do. Hence why I think their offense will continue to be as prolific in Week 2, if not more prolific, because the Raiders against the Ravens do actually have a very talented DB core. Darius St. Robertson was the first player ever signed to the Munich Ravens, and also players like Milos Illich are very talented secondary players. Ken Hike is definitely the best player on that defense. He was locked down for portions of that game against Barcelona Dragons, but I think the other side leaves a little bit to be desired. And with the amount of weapons that the Raiders have with Hahn and Schneider and maybe Sandro and McClam and definitely Strong, it's just going to be too much for them to handle, and I think that another 400 to 500 yard performance is not completely out of question at all. Moving on, we have, can the Panthers sustain the current production that they are on? Although not defensively excellent, the Panthers really did put together a surprise win by beating the 2-time finalist Hamburg Sea Devils. Taking into account that their QB and receiver have only had about a week to work together, and yet Tony Tate put up 175 yards. Which is even more impressive when you consider that's a Panthers team record, and the Panthers have had a current Cowboys wide receiver and Malik Stanley on their roster in the past. Allowing 25 points at home is also never the best factor in terms of their long-term success. They only had 1 sack on the day, 5 tackles for loss, which was respectable, especially on Hamburg, but it wasn't a spectacular defensive showing. It was more the offense really coming out and surprising everyone. So you could argue they're in a similar situation than the Raiders in terms of, can their offense maintain and just outscore everyone else. In terms of Week 2, they have the Leipzig Kings, and that is a very, very winnable game. The Leipzig Kings were not very good last week. They do have a pretty good couple of DBs, but obviously one of them has just gone down with assumingly a season-ending injury. At the time of this recording, it's not been confirmed that it is a season, but sources close to myself kind of suggesting that it is. So Leipzig are a little bit battered and bruised already Week 1, so I think that the Panthers will continue their production. Their defense is good enough to deal with Leipzig, their offense is good enough to outscore Leipzig, and I can see them walking away with another win. My third and final point is along the similar lines of just how good really are the Barcelona Dragons. Members of their team called out myself indirectly and other media members for being experts, so I loved it. I thought it was really, really funny, really, really great, and a very good storyline for them to be these underdogs that have been to this championship level team. Some of their key players leave, and now they're, still proven that they're a really good contender, and I love that. I think it's really good for the league. But we really still don't really know who they are. You know, they beat a Heltovik Guards, who are an expansion team. They had no core going into this, were made completely fresh with new players that might not know each other and have that built-out chemistry, unlike the Dragons do. They have done a very good job in restructuring their offensive line, I thought, and kind of continuing to add weapons. I think Johnston is an excellent receiver, and so is Landstrom, another very good underrated deep threat. I had him as like a number 3 receiver, I think, in my preseason gradings. And he's went out and probably edged himself into tier 2, so he showed himself to be a serious weapon. This week they have Milan, and people who have seen some of my stuff before know I think of Milan as being probably a slightly below average team. Maybe the 8th to 10th in terms of power rankings, if you want to do it like that. And I don't think their homegrown players are good enough. I think that their D-line isn't going to stop much in that division especially, and I think that Barcelona could have a good day. And if they do beat Milan, I'm still not convinced, and I know that takes a lot. It sounds like I'm being super harsh on them, but to be an expansion team and then beating a first team in the league kind of season, it doesn't prove to me that they're the contender that they expect themselves to be. And I know that Bragani is going to get on me for being a hater, but I'm just interested to see how that defense can deal with Jean Constant and with Simsir, because they didn't deal with Ninsata excellently. Like, they weren't brilliant. He had 200 yards. They dealt with Jahali quite well, but you know, Silas is a different beast, and Jean Constant is also a different beast. So it'll be interesting to see if they can make the adjustments. And with Luke being such a physically dominant in QB, that will be another factor into it. And with the running backs they have by committee, I do think Ali Khalifa is fine. I think Modest Puda is better, which is odd considering they're an E import. Ali is an E import, but that's a subject for another video. But I think with the consistency of that run game, Jean Constant and Luke, it will really give the Dragons a problem. And if they go out and blow them out the water, I am prepared to call them a top team, maybe in the top 8. But if they don't, I'm withholding judgment. Even if they get like a narrow win, I'm withholding judgment. So I apologize to all the Barcelona Dragon fans, but that's how I'm going to put it. Thank you very, very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one. I wanted to do a bit more of a podcasty feel for this and just more free-flowing analysis rather than so many cuts and edits. I think it turned out well. And let's just see how these storylines develop and what ones we come up with next week. The stats pages still are not great for the LF, and neither are the highlights for the AI controlling who gets highlights and who doesn't. So some of the highlight videos may come out on a Wednesday rather than a Tuesday. I tried to get them ASAP out as soon as possible, but with the correction, they seem to put the stats on the page and then correct them later, which I hate. So we'll just have to see if they adjust that during the year, but I really do hope they start waiting until they put up stats before they do put them out as official, because I think it's silly to have stats and then change them on the page to get everyone's attention. We'll see. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed. Like, subscribe, share, whatever you have to do. I really, really appreciate it. On the road to 1K and 4,000 hours, so I could technically get money off of these videos. Would be awesome. And thank you very much, and goodbye.